r/ask Reddit. Waiters. What Valentine's Day disasters have you witnessed? They came in at lunch the day after, so it was pretty empty, but it was still for a Valentine's Day date. They were both pretty nice at the beginning, and the guy asked for a picture and whatnot. As the meal went on, the dude got progressively drunker, and by the time I brought the check out, the woman was gone. When the dude gave me his card, he said, "I'll give you a bit of advice. If you're taking a girl out to break up with her, do it at McDonald's and not an expensive restaurant." I blew my car's tire, and my friend came in to bail me out. We're both straight dudes and forgot it was Valentine's. Decided to have dinner, and both were coming from important meetings, so had suits on. We didn't catch on until the end on how the entire waitstaff thought we were just the cutest gay couple. There was a note in our reservations that it was an engagement. They wanted champagne, a specific seat, and a bunch of other stuff. The server comes up to the table with something like, "So I read we're celebrating an engagement, congratulations." Confusion from the woman and glaring from the guy. He hadn't proposed yet. She ruined it. These two were on a date, and the guy went to go use the bathroom. The girl just up and leaves after he went to the restroom. When the guy came back, he sat around for a while until asking his waitress where she went. She replied with saying that she left. The guy then asked the waitress if she would go on a date with him. The waitress said no. 0 for 2 in one night. Damn. He proposed. She said no. He cried and tried to change her mind for 20 minutes while she sat there stony-faced. She finally got up and walked out. He paid and left in tears. Why are there so many people proposing to people they've not discussed marriage with before? It blows my mind. Not a waiter, but in my strip club bouncer days, we had one of the regulars get suited up and bring flowers in one V-Day to try and woo one of the dancers. It did not work. Pro tip, if every time y'all hang out it involves you giving her money, she is not into you. I worked at a pretty high-end Mediterranean bistro. My second Valentine's there, it was probably the busiest night I've ever worked as a server. We had reservations that booked basically the entire restaurant, including the bar and patio, from 4 to 11 p.m. No walk-ins were to be seated unless a reservation was canceled or someone with a reservation didn't show up. Most of the customers were pretty understanding and either waited or constantly saying how he is a regular customer and how his date is going to be there at 7. He got there at 6. We insisted that once a table was available and all the customers before him were seated, he'd get a table. But because of the amount of reservations, we couldn't guarantee he would even get a table at all. At about 6:50, the guy loses it, fast walks up to the hostess stand where the reservation book is, grabs the reservation book, and practically runs out the front door. Now everything is going to complete shit because the only copy of the reservation for the night that is barely half over is gone. Two of the owners ran outside to follow the guy and try and get the book back, but by the time they got out, he had already left the parking lot. Even better, 2 hours later, chaos is still running rampant, and the dude shows back up saying he has a reservation for 2. 3 of the 5 owners, all brothers, escorted the dude and his date out to the parking lot and banned him from the restaurant permanently. They even took a picture of him and posted it in the window saying, "Do not serve this man." Not waitstaff, but I used to work front desk at a hotel. One Valentine's Day, I was working the night shift, and this woman comes down with a cut above her eye looking like she just won a few rounds in the ring with a boxer. The woman starts sobbing and asks us to call the cops, which we do immediately. Turns out this girl's boyfriend just beat the shit out of her during a fight, and from what I could tell, this probably wasn't the first time. So after the cops show up and haul the dude off, my manager offers her a different room on comp as we need to leave the guy's stuff where it is for him to pick it up the next day. She accepts and I go up with the woman to help collect her stuff and move to the new room. There are a bunch of bottles of alcohol in the room, and she donated them to the front desk staff. I got a bottle of Hypnotique and some vodka, and my manager got a bottle of Patron. Cherry on top of everything, the dude's wife called later that night saying someone had stolen his card as he was out of town on a business trip. Never one to defend an abuser, I told her where she could find her husband. Fun times. I had a Section 1 V-Day that had a marriage proposal, a 40th anniversary, and a breakup all at the same time. The breakup was the worst. The guy brought his high-class date a gift, a mini ceramic bear holding balloons. He presented it while I was at the table, and she looked at it like it was a hot turd. I just knew this was not going to end well. She left at the end of the meal and must have said something because he stayed at the table another 40 minutes, head down and crying. I felt bad. He saw the celebrations going on at the other tables. Not a waiter, but I was a pastry chef at this big resort in Cape Cod. We got a special order from this guy who was coming in for his anniversary, Valentine's Day. He wanted his dessert to have "Will you marry me" written on it so he could pop the question when it came out. He called ahead to go to the front and back kitchen, even came in himself that morning to make sure it was good to go. The whole crew was behind him. We had cooks all night coming in to ask if it had happened yet. I wrote the inscription on the plate and dressed it to the nines with gold leaf and expensive chocolate. I'm taking a picture of the plate just before it's set to go out, and notice our head waiter comes in with a weird look on his face. He says plainly, "They don't need it." She broke up with him before the entrees hit the table. Ruthless. A guy did a backflip and asked a girl to be his Valentine. She declined. I walked up to him and asked if he was fine. He said it took him a week to perfect. I feel for this guy. Man, I hope he found someone. I was eating in a fine dining establishment, Chili's, several years ago. In the next booth was a really young guy who had a big bunch of roses on the seat next to him. He kept looking at his watch, looking at the roses, and popping open a ring box for a peek at the ring. He did this for over a half hour or so, then began calling and texting someone, presumably his girlfriend, over and over. As we were waiting for our check, he hands my wife the roses, mumbled something, and walked out. Poor guy. I used to be a waiter in a 5-star restaurant, and it was my first week. One guy was about to propose. It was obvious by how much he was sweating. He was drenched. I tried to make them both relax. They both went on to finish up their meal. As soon as the cake arrived, he then went on one knee. She stood up suddenly, and he vomited right on her high heels. After the shock of what just happened, she ended up saying yes. Now that's love. A guy proposed to his girlfriend, and she said no. The guy threw up his arms and ran out of the building. Later, while waiting for someone to pick her up, she told us it was completely out of the blue because they'd only been dating for a few months. Another V-Day, a guy raised a huge fuss over the fact that we wouldn't serve liquor to his underage girlfriend. I'm certain you mean threw up his hands momentarily in exasperation, but I can't help picturing him running out of the restaurant, arms straight up Kermit the Frog style. A 16-year-old boy proposed to a 15-year-old girl with a cheap ring and the whipped cream of her dessert. She said yes. So romance isn't quite dead yet. Old man proposed to old woman. He tried to get off the chair to kneel, tripped and fell, and I assume broke something since he couldn't get back up and we had to call an ambulance. My manager had to drive her teeth to the hospital separately because she had taken them out to eat her soup, Lord knows why, and left them on the table in the confusion. Busboy on Las Vegas Strip. An attempted proposal. Dude tries to set up sign with GF's friends for her to show up and see a ring near the fountain. Duck stole the ring. They found it 2 hours later as he dropped it in the fountain. She still said yes. Free drinks were given. Untitled goose game. Not my table, but back in my Olive Garden days, we had a man who looked to be in his mid-20s tap his empty glass wine with a fork to call for attention of the surrounding strangers, then get down on one knee with the silver band in hand, and then asked his girlfriend/date to accept this promise ring. She looked horrified from start to finish. Back when I served food at one of those super touristy seafood restaurants, I worked a Valentine's Day double shift. For lunch, this younger couple came and celebrated. I offer my congratulations and proceed to do my usual spiel before taking orders. The girl is looking more and more dismayed the longer I talk. Finally, I get to the end and ask if there are any allergies. She looks directly at her boyfriend and states, "Yes, I'm allergic to fish and shellfish." Then looks over at me very sad. I made sure every aspect of her meal was fine for her, but it was that look of, we've been dating a year and he still takes me to a restaurant that could kill me, that really did it for me. Had a man and woman sharing dessert, and the man playfully put a bit of the ice cream on her nose, and then she did the same, and he did it back one more, but with a different flavor of ice cream. She then flipped out at him because, "You know I like chocolate the most, why would you waste it, you idiot?" In the end, she stormed out because the man couldn't comprehend how much she was blowing up the situation. TLDR, man put ice cream on woman's nose, she is fine with it the first time, the second time she rages and leaves. In college, I waited tables, and Valentine's Day was always a good one in terms of tips. I once saw a couple come in to eat. Halfway through the dinner, the man's wife shows up to surprise the couple. The wife took the wine bottle and poured the remnants on the husband's head, took off her ring, and told the girlfriend she could have him. He tipped me $100 bill. You gotta think that your wife might think something is up when you're busy on Valentine's Day. I was working for a higher-end chain steakhouse in the northwest corner of Greater Los Angeles, in the Valley. Valentine's is obviously one of the top 5 busiest days of the year for us. We did about 500 covers between 5 and 10 p.m. It's also a restaurant with a very open concept floor plan. Booths along the 4 walls of the restaurant and an array of tables in the middle with no partitions or anything between them. A younger couple, maybe in mid-20s, dressed to the nines, came in shortly after we opened and were seated at a table basically in the dead center of the dining room. They were very friendly and pleasant, and I could tell that for them, dining at our restaurant was really a special treat, so I did everything in my power to make sure it was special for them. When they're done, probably around 7, I brought their check, which was around $300. When I came back to pick it up, the guy had a super embarrassed look on his face, and he said he thinks he left his wallet in the car, and the woman, who was embarrassed for him, doesn't have anything with her because her dress has no pockets and she didn't bring a purse. So he goes out and 5 minutes later comes back in looking pale as a ghost. He has left his wallet at home and asks if he can call back later with payment info. My GM won't let this fly because there's no collateral of any sort he can leave, so the guy has to drive home to Burbank to get his wallet while the woman waits with her hair done and her red lipstick and her pretty dress in the middle of the dining room on Valentine's Day. Now, on the best day with no traffic, never happens, it's at least 40 minutes each way from our restaurant to Burbank. She was there for almost 2 hours waiting for this guy. We were all so embarrassed for her that the staff kept discreetly slipping her drinks and little amuse-bouche bites from the kitchen. It was one of the most awkward things I've ever seen in a restaurant. When he finally got back, he was super apologetic to us and to her. He paid the check and tipped like 30% and they left. It was pretty obvious it was an honest mistake, but I still think about that couple from time to time and wonder how things worked out for them. I was working as a waitress in a sushi restaurant, and Valentine's Day was an all-hands-on-deck shift. This guy I had just started seeing wanted to go out, but I told him that working in food service, you never get Valentine's Day off, and we just have to celebrate the day after or weekend after. Nope. He got so upset that he went and asked a different girl out, came to the restaurant I worked at on V-Day, and sat in my section. He then proceeded to spend the entire evening making a fool out of himself and making his date uncomfortable as he tried to make me jealous. Needless to say, we didn't go out again. Ever. I was the manager of a wings and pizza place with a full bar. Definitely not the kind of place you'd take someone for a romantic Valentine's Day dinner, but it was still busy because some people aren't very tactful. We had a guy who called ahead and asked if we could put a ring in a dessert for him, and of course we obliged. He dropped the ring off the day ahead, and I put it in the safe in our office to keep it secure. Fast forward to Valentine's Day. The couple shows up and they're so obviously in love that she doesn't seem to notice or care about the fact that he had brought her to a middle-of-the-road place with a sports bar atmosphere on the most romantic day of the year. They ordered champagne, well, the local winery's best sparkling white, entrees, and it was almost time for dessert. I had used my chef skills to whip up a special chocolate strawberry tart that wasn't on the menu just for this occasion, because why not try to make their night at least a little fancy? I went to the safe to get the ring, and it wasn't there. I was freaking out big time. I asked everyone there if they knew what the fuck had happened to it. My assistant manager on site had no idea, so I called my other assistant, who also had the safe coat, and they didn't know either. Finally, my bar manager mentioned that one of the owners had been in earlier and spent a little time in the office, so at my wit's end, I called the owner. It turns out that he had seen the ring in the safe and thought it was something a customer had left behind. Figuring that he had come into an extremely lucky situation, he decided, like the scumbag he was, that he'd take it for himself and save money on a gift for his wife for Valentine's. So I asked the server and bar manager to help stall the couple. The server told them that they were going to do something special for their big date and to hold tight. I ran out, hopped in my car, and rushed to get the ring from the owner's house because he was, as I mentioned, a scumbag, and didn't want to be bothered with bringing the ring to the restaurant himself. The bar manager went over to the table and did some complicated tableside cocktail mix that had a bunch of flair, bartending tricks, and ended with a flaming shot that, once dropped into the rest, made it smoke. I was really disappointed when I heard about all this, because I would have loved to see it instead of breaking a ton of traffic laws on my quest to get the ring. Finally, I rushed back after about 15 minutes of being on the brink of a heart attack, placed the ring on the dessert, and had their server take it out. At that point, just about the entire staff was watching the table, and when we saw the look on her face, my heart finally started beating again. She said yes, and I started looking for someone else to work for the very next day. Not really much of a disaster, but last year my work called me up. "Hey buddy, we know you're single. Can you come in as an extra shift tonight?" "No, I have a date with your wife." 2 failed marriage proposals on the same Valentine's Day. The first one simply said, "No, I can't do this," and walked out. The second one stared like a deer frozen in the headlights for an excruciating 30 seconds before muttering, "Let's talk about this later." They stayed for the rest of their 6-course V-Day special dinner, eating and making painful small talk. So a couple have a full-on argument at a restaurant. I wasn't their server, but the table was directly in the center of the restaurant, and they were certainly loud enough for everyone to hear. My manager kindly asked them to leave, and the guy's response was to yell, "I've been wanting to do that shit for 2 years now," and stormed out. That's a really good comeback, though. He nailed that exit. A girl that I worked with went to lunch on Valentine's Day at an expensive restaurant her boyfriend had gotten a reservation for. She dressed up nice, was going on about how sure she was that he was going to propose to her. He broke up with her. Breaking up at a VD lunch in an expensive restaurant feels unnecessarily harsh. I walked up to a table and was about to drop off the bill, caught the end of, "It's over." Guy looked at me dead in the eye and said to split that fucking check right now. Someone showing up for a date and you both realize about 30 minutes in she ain't coming. Drinks on me, buddy. Maybe that's what I should do next time I'm single or don't have plans on V-Day. Go around to different places and get free shit. Happened to my poor coworker. A guy and his date came in for Valentine's Day. They had a great time, ate a lot of food, drank a lot of wine, and got along really well with my coworker who was their server. About 2 months later, they come back in and request my coworker again, who happily says yes to serving them. He goes up and greets them. The guy introduces his wife to him, and my coworker mentions something about how much he enjoyed serving them on Valentine's Day. They go quiet. Wife gets up and leaves. Guy just lowers his head. Turns out he had brought his mistress in on Valentine's Day, but my coworker didn't realize he was with a different woman this time around, so didn't think anything of it. We never saw the guy again. Not really a disaster, but this guy came in and said he was waiting for his date. He stayed for 5 hours waiting and she never showed. He eventually ordered for himself and asked that I remove the other glass of water from the table. He said it was their first date. Damn, why would you wait for 5 hours? I'm out of there after 30 minutes. At that point, doesn't that make him the waiter? Yeah, I've been there. Like last week. Feels bad. I saw a couple have a full-blown argument in the middle of the restaurant. The woman stood up, took her ring off, threw it at him, and walked out. The man continued his meal, had dessert, and then paid the bill, left a pretty big tip for the inconvenience, and left.